$17. That was the entire sum of Cassandra Pierce's existence on a night in late February when the fluorescent lights of Miami Children's Hospital hummed like a machine counting down the seconds until her life ended. She sat in the donation chair at 11:36 p.m., her left arm extended into the cold of the room, watching her blood travel through the transparent tube, dark crimson against sterile white plastic. The needle was thin, precise, pulling from her vein with the patience of a small thief stealing what little she had left. The nurse beside her was speaking, but her voice sounded far away, muffled like it was coming through water. "We really appreciate this. O-negative is so rare. The little girl in 304, her parents can't donate due to medical complications. You're her best chance." Cassandra nodded, barely hearing. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut, the skin around it blooming in shades of purple and yellow like a flower that had learned to hurt. The finger marks on her throat sat visible above the collar of her cheap polyester waitress uniform, dark bruises forming a necklace she had never chosen to wear. She lifted her free hand, the one without the needle, and began counting the bills again. 17 $1 notes. Crumpled from being gripped too tightly, worn soft from being counted too many times. She had been counting them all day. This morning there were 3 envelopes in her mailbox, each one stamped with red letters. Collection notice. Past due. Final notice. One of them arrived from a hospital in Orlando for $47,000, a surgery her ex-husband had received before he died, 8 months ago, before he left behind a wake of debts like a ship sinking and dragging everyone down with it. Another came from the bank for $63,000, the mortgage on the apartment she no longer owned but the bank insisted she still owed $4,000. The third was from a credit company for $40,000. Altogether they added up to $150,000, and the deadline stamped at the bottom of each letter said 12 days. 12 days to produce money she would never have, not in 1,000 lifetimes of double shifts and stiff tips and eating the leftover scrambled eggs from the to-go orders nobody picked up. But this was how Cassandra had learned to live. $1 at a time. 1 hour at a time. One breath followed by another breath. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hospital donation center, Miami's winter skyline spread out like a photograph of a world that belonged to other people. The sky was clear and cold, stars visible above the city like shards of ice someone had scattered across black velvet. Frost had crystallized on the glass where her breath kept fogging against the pane. She could see the parking lot below, the empty streets, the whole city sleeping while she sat here draining what little blood she had into a plastic bag for a child she would never meet. Her phone sat on the small metal table beside the donation chair. It had buzzed 3 times in the last hour. 3 text messages from a number she had memorized, a number that made her stomach clench every time she heard the notification sound. Anthony Marchetti. Her ex-boyfriend. The man who had begun hunting her the way a cat hunts a mouse, with patience, with certainty, knowing that eventually the mouse will make a mistake. The most recent message, sent at 10:33 p.m., read, "You can't hide forever, Cassie. I'm going to find you. And when I do, you're going to wish you had paid me when you had the chance." Before that, at 7:15 p.m., the clock is ticking. And before that, at 2:22 p.m., I know where you work. I know the shelter where you volunteer. I know everything about you. She didn't open the messages. She had learned that opening them only made them feel more real. Instead, she focused on the blood flowing from her arm, watching it fill the bag with the hypnotic pull of a leech. The nurse had said it was a rare type. O-negative. Needed for the little girl in room 304, a child whose parents couldn't give her what she needed, just like so many children couldn't. Just like Cassandra herself had needed things as a child that no one ever gave her. "How are you feeling?" the nurse asked. She was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled into a practical bun. There was compassion in the way she looked at Cassandra, but it was the dangerous kind of compassion, the kind that asks questions. "I'm fine," Cassandra said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Like something trapped in a cage trying not to make noise. "Just help the child." The nurse's eyes lingered on the bruises around Cassandra's throat, the swollen geometry of her face. She wanted to ask. Cassandra could see the question forming behind her eyes like a bird trying to escape a cage. But she didn't ask. People like the nurse learned quickly that sometimes compassion was a luxury you couldn't afford to express. The bag of blood grew darker, heavier. Cassandra watched it fill and felt nothing at all. She had learned not to feel things. Feeling things was expensive. Feeling things meant crying, and crying wasted water and salt your body needed. Feeling things meant anger, and anger burned calories you could have used to survive. So she sat in the chair and watched her blood leave her body and thought about the $17 and the 12 days and the sound of Anthony Marchetti's voice on the phone last night, thick with promises of violence. He had said he would find her. He had said it with such certainty that she believed him. There was nowhere in Miami you could hide from someone like Anthony Marchetti, especially not when you owed him money and he had made it his business to collect from you in ways the law would never touch. The parking lot was silent except for the hum of the hospital's ventilation system, a steady electrical whine that seemed to exist in the background of Cassandra's entire life. Machines and systems and mechanisms grinding forward regardless of what happened inside them. The world would keep going. The city would keep turning. Her blood would reach the little girl in room 304 and maybe save her life, and then Cassandra would walk back down to street level and return to her apartment where the eviction notice was probably already waiting on her door, and none of it would matter. She closed her eyes. Outside the window, 3 blocks away, a black SUV turned onto the street that led to the hospital. It moved slowly through the frozen night, its headlights cutting through the darkness like blades. Inside the SUV, 2 men in dark suits sat in the front seat, their expressions unreadable, their hands resting on their knees with the practiced calm of people who had learned to wait for violence the way other people wait for morning. The driver was named Tony. The passenger was named Sal. They worked for a man named Dominic Vitoli, who at that exact moment was in room 304, sitting beside a hospital bed where his daughter lay unconscious, her small body pale against white sheets, her blood type requiring a type that was almost impossible to find. But none of this was known to Cassandra Pierce as she sat in her donation chair watching the last of her O-negative blood drip into the plastic bag. She didn't know that the blood she was giving was about to save a life. She didn't know that saving that life would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy the man hunting her, expose the woman who had been working to destroy what remained of her world, and fundamentally alter the trajectory of her existence. She knew only that she had $17, 12 days, and nowhere to run. The blood bag filled completely. The nurse removed the needle with a soft click of metal against the vein. She placed a cotton ball over the wound and pressed gently. All done. You did something beautiful tonight. Thank you. Cassandra nodded. She didn't feel like she had done anything beautiful. She felt like a machine that had performed its function. Empty. Drained. Ready to be discarded. As she stood to leave the donation center, steadying herself against the chair because her blood loss had made her slightly dizzy, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The nurse was already walking away with the blood bag, carrying it toward the elevator that would take her up to room 304, where a little girl was waiting for a stranger's blood to save her life. Cassandra didn't know she had just set everything in motion. She walked toward the hospital exit, her $17 still clutched in her free hand, her throat still marked with bruises, her eye still swollen shut. The glass doors of the hospital slid open with a mechanical whisper, and the Miami winter air hit her like a slap. Frost and wind and the particular cold of a night when everything feels like it might break. The black SUV in the parking lot didn't move. Its engine was off. Its headlights were dark. But inside, 2 men sat watching the hospital entrance, waiting for someone who would never come. They were watching for Dominic Vitoli's wife, dead now for 6 years. They were watching for his brother, who had betrayed him and caused the kidnapping of his only son. They were watching for enemies and ghosts. They were not watching for a waitress with $17 and a swollen eye who had just given the blood that would save their boss's daughter. But soon enough, they would know her name. And nothing in either of their worlds would ever be the same. 3 days before Cassandra Pierce gave her blood to a stranger, she was counting coins on a mattress without a frame. The studio apartment in Little Havana was so cold she could see her breath, small clouds of white that disappeared into the gray light filtering through a single window. Outside, frost coated the glass in patterns that looked like fractures. Inside, Cassandra sat cross-legged on the bare mattress, her worn cardigan wrapped twice around her body, and separated $17 into piles on the blanket in front of her. Quarters. Dimes. Nickels. Pennies. She had done this every morning for 8 months. The ritual was always the same. Count what remained. Subtract what was due. Understand what was impossible. $17. That number lived in her chest like a stone. The rent was due in 12 days. $750 for a place that had no heat, no hot water that worked reliably, and a landlord named Harold Brennan who came to the door every third week with his hand extended, fingers spread, waiting to be paid or waiting for something else. She had learned the difference between those two kinds of waiting. She had paid him $340 so far this month. That left $410 still owed. And $17 in her possession. The mathematics of survival had become the only language she spoke fluently. The electricity bill was overdue by 14 days. A notice had arrived yesterday, yellow paper folded into her mailbox, warning of disconnection. She had read it twice, then placed it face down on the counter, as if not looking at it would delay what was coming. Her phone had buzzed 6 times yesterday. Creditors. The hospital. The collections agency that called at 9 in the morning when they thought she would be awake. She had stopped answering. The sound of her own voice confirming her name, confirming she was alive and therefore still responsible for debts that would outlive her, had become unbearable. $150,000. That was the number that had consumed her husband Marcus. It was the number that had followed him into the construction site on a Tuesday morning 8 months ago, the number that had been waiting for him when the scaffolding failed, when his body fell from the 3rd story and hit the concrete below with a sound that witnesses said was like a sack of wet concrete hitting the ground. $150,000 in gambling debts to people who did not forgive. Marcus was dead now. The debts were not. They belonged to her now. They lived in her name, on documents with her signature, in the voices of men who called her apartment and spoke about payment plans and consequences and what could happen to people who thought they could simply disappear. The phone buzzed again this morning. 6:41 a.m. She didn't look at the screen. Instead, she placed the $17 back into her purse, a faded leather thing that had belonged to her mother and was now held together with a safety pin and hope. The purse was soft in places where the leather had worn through from years of being carried, held close, clutched like a prayer. She dressed in the dark to avoid turning on the light. The electric meter was probably marked, measured, watched. Every watt was a debt she could not afford. The volunteer shift at Helping Hand started at 7 in the morning. The shelter was 6 blocks away. The walk would warm her slightly, and they would give her breakfast, which meant she could save the $17 for something worse than hunger. The streets of Little Havana were still sleeping when Cassandra walked through them. Frost crunched under her shoes, thin and brittle and ancient sounding. The sky was the color of old concrete. Nobody was out yet except for the delivery trucks and one man pushing a shopping cart that held everything he owned, his breath creating small explosions of white in the cold air. She recognized him. His name was Robert. He slept in the parking lot behind the Publix sometimes, when the weather wasn't lethal. She had given him coffee twice, and once a sandwich wrapped in plastic from the diner where she worked nights. He nodded at her. She nodded back. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say about survival that the other person did not already know. The Helping Hand shelter occupied a converted church in a neighborhood where the church had stopped being wanted. The brick was painted a hopeful yellow, though the paint was peeling in places, revealing older paint underneath, and older paint beneath that, like the history of human optimism written in layers that could not be protected. Inside, the industrial kitchen smelled like oatmeal and hope. Cassandra tied an apron around her waist, washed her hands in water that was almost warm, and began ladling porridge into bowls. 43 people came through the breakfast line that morning. She knew most of them by name. Rosa with the 2 children who slept in their car. James with the tremor in his hand who had been a surgeon before the drinking. A pregnant woman named Teresa who would not make eye contact with anyone. And Oliver. He was 6 years old and appeared at the shelter most mornings, sometimes with his grandmother, sometimes alone. He was a small child with dark curly hair and skin the color of coffee with cream, and eyes so serious and observant that they seemed to belong to someone much older. He wore a shirt that was too large for him, the fabric faded, and shoes that had been repaired so many times they looked like they were made of patches. He carried a prayer card in his pocket. St. Christopher. She had seen it a dozen times, the card so worn that the image was almost erased, the edges soft and fraying. He touched it the way other children touched blankets or toys. "Good morning, Oliver," Cassandra said, ladling extra oatmeal into his bowl, making sure the portion was generous. Her supervisor didn't notice. Her supervisor never noticed when she gave the children more. "How are you today?" He looked up at her with those grave eyes. "I am good, Miss Cassandra. How are you?" "I'm cold," she said, which was honest. "But I'm warmer now that I see you." It was the kind of thing adults said to children. Small kindnesses made of words. Oliver took the bowl carefully, with both hands, and moved to the table. But he sat where he could still see her. She noticed things about him that the other volunteers did not seem to notice. The way he ate slowly, taking small bites, making the portion last as long as possible. The way he watched the other children, but did not play with them. The way he touched his prayer card between bites, as if it was food too, as if faith was something you could consume. When the breakfast service ended and the families were filing out, Oliver lingered. He came back to the counter where Cassandra was scraping bowls. "Miss Cassandra." His voice was small, careful. "Do you have a little boy?" She set down the bowl she was holding. Something in her chest contracted, a muscle clenching around a wound that had never healed. "No, sweetie. I don't have any children." "Oh." He looked down at his prayer card. "Because you are like a mommy. When you give me oatmeal, it tastes different than when Mrs. Garcia gives it. It tastes like someone is taking care of me." She could not speak. Her throat had closed. She knelt down so she was at his eye level, and he looked at her with an expression of profound sadness that a 6-year-old should never have had to learn. "I always wanted a son," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Someone just exactly like you. If I had a little boy, he would look just like you." "My papa had to send me away," Oliver said. He touched the prayer card. "He said there were bad men trying to hurt him, and he had to keep me safe. He said my mama went to heaven when I was very small. I don't remember her." "Your papa must love you so much," Cassandra whispered. "I don't know where he is now," Oliver said. "Grandma doesn't like to talk about it. But I have this." He held up the prayer card, the image of St. Christopher barely visible on the worn surface. "St. Christopher protects travelers. I think my papa gave it to me so I would know he was trying to protect me even when he couldn't be with me." She pulled Oliver against her chest and held him. His small body was stiff at first, unused to being held, but then he relaxed into her, and she felt his arms wrap around her neck. He smelled like soap and something else, something that might have been fear, or loneliness, or the particular sadness of a child who had learned too early that the world was not safe. When his grandmother came to collect him, Cassandra released him slowly. She watched them leave, the old woman's hand protective on his back, Oliver turning to look at Cassandra one last time as the door closed. The night shift at Rosario's diner began at 4 in the afternoon and ended at midnight. The diner was the color of surrender, fluorescent lights that hummed like insects, vinyl booths the shade of dried blood, a counter that had been wiped so many times it had worn thin in places, revealing the laminate underneath. Cassandra tied her apron and took her position at the counter. The uniform was blue with white trim, purchased 7 years ago when she had first been hired, back when she was still married to Marcus and they had both believed that 2 incomes meant safety. The dinner rush was slow. 3 construction workers ordered coffee and pie. A couple in booth 7 ordered burgers and did not speak to each other. A man in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent sat alone and read the newspaper while eating a sandwich. At 8:30, her phone buzzed. She felt it vibrate in her apron pocket, but she did not answer. She kept moving. Coffee refills. Clearing plates. The small, repetitive motions that kept her invisible. It buzzed again. And again. On the 3rd buzz, she stepped into the back where the cook was not watching and looked at the screen. Unknown number. She almost deleted it. But something in her, some residual instinct for self-preservation, made her answer. Hello? Cassandra. The voice was smooth, practiced, like velvet over concrete. It's Anthony. The coffee she was holding became very heavy. Her hand trembled. I saw you at the grocery store yesterday. You looked cold. You looked like you needed someone to keep you warm. Anthony, I told you. I'm coming to get you soon. I've been patient. But my patience has limits. And your time is running out. He hung up. Her co-worker Maria appeared in the doorway. Maria was older, 50-something, with the tired face of someone who had worked in diners for 30 years and had learned that tips were inconsistent and men were worse. You okay? Maria asked. You look like you saw a ghost. Cassandra put the phone back in her apron. I'm fine. Just a wrong number. Sure you are, Maria said, but she didn't push. In places like this, everyone had phone calls they didn't want to talk about. The shift ended at midnight. The walk home through Miami took 20 minutes. The streets were empty except for the occasional car, the occasional figure moving in the shadows, the occasional moment where Cassandra wondered if Anthony was in one of those cars, if he was watching from the darkness. She climbed the stairs to her apartment on the 2nd floor. Her key shook in her hand as she tried to fit it into the lock. The door swung open. It had not been locked. Inside, her clothes were scattered across the floor. Her small stack of folded shirts, torn from the drawer and left in a chaos that looked deliberate, purposeful. A message written without words. I can reach you whenever I want. She did not turn on the lights. She sat on the mattress without a frame and pulled her cardigan tighter around herself and thought about Oliver's prayer card, about his serious eyes, about the fact that some people had fathers who tried to protect them even from far away. She had no one. She was completely alone. And the world was very large and very cold and very full of people like Anthony Marchetti who believed that wanting something gave them the right to take it. Her phone was silent now. All the buzzing had stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the sound had been. She counted her $17 one more time, but not because she believed it would help. She counted it because counting was something to do with her hands that was not shaking. The December cold bit through her skin like a blade wrapped in ice. Cassandra Pierce stood in the diner parking lot at 10:11 p.m., her breath forming small white clouds that disappeared into the frozen air, and she did not see him at first. The stars overhead were sharp as diamonds, each one distant and indifferent. Her shift had ended 15 minutes ago. She had counted her tips 3 times, $6.85 added to the 17 she already had, and still the math did not change. $23.85. Everything she owned in the world fit into the pockets of her borrowed coat. The black Mustang was parked at the far end of the lot, engine already running. Anthony Marchetti leaned against the hood with the patience of a man who knew he would get what he wanted. He was 38, muscular in the way that came from prison yards and anger management issues he refused to manage, with dark hair slicked back and a gold chain catching the streetlight. When he smiled, it was like watching a predator test its teeth. "Been avoiding me, Cassie," he called out, his voice carrying across the empty lot. She did not stop walking. She did not answer. She simply kept moving toward her 2003 Honda Civic, parked 3 rows over, and her hands were already shaking before he moved. This was the mistake. This was the moment she would replay 1,000 times in the nights that followed. She should have run to her car. She should have screamed. She should have done 1,000 things other than what she did, which was turn and face him, chin up, eyes blazing with a desperation that felt like courage. "We're done, Anthony," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady. "I told you that months ago." He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hand grabbed her left arm, fingers digging in, and he spun her against the brick wall of the diner so hard the impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her temple struck the rough edge of the wall. Stars exploded in her vision. Pain bloomed like flowers opening all at once. "You think you can just walk away from me?" His breath smelled like whiskey and cigarettes. His hand wrapped around her throat like a collar she never chose, and he was squeezing, pressing, the pressure building in her head like a balloon about to burst. "You're mine, Cassie. Always will be. That's how this works. That's how you understand." She tried to claw at his face. Her fingernails caught something, skin, maybe his cheek, and he responded by driving his fist into her eye socket. The world went red and then black and then red again. Her vision darkened like someone was closing curtains, and she could not breathe, could not see, could only feel the shape of his hand crushing her throat and the impossible weight of him against her body. Then headlights swept across the parking lot. A delivery truck pulled in toward the loading dock at the back of the diner. Anthony released her like she was on fire, laughed, a sound like gravel being crushed, and walked back to his Mustang. He did not hurry. He did not run. He simply got into his car, and the engine roared to life, and he pulled away laughing, one hand raised in a casual wave like they had just finished a pleasant conversation. Cassandra collapsed against the wall. Her face exploded with pain. Her throat was on fire. When she touched her eye, her hand came away wet, blood or tears, she could not tell. She tasted copper. Her left eye was already swelling shut, the eyelid puffy and hot. When she tried to stand, the world tilted sideways. She held onto the brick wall and made it to her feet using only the strength of her desperation. She could not go home. Anthony knew where she lived. He had proven that when he scattered her belongings across her floor like breadcrumbs marking a trail. So Cassandra did what she always did when the world became too sharp and too dangerous. She walked. The frozen streets of Miami stretched out in every direction, endless and empty. Her feet moved without conscious decision. Her mind floated somewhere above her body, observing from a distance, watching this broken woman in a waitress uniform stumble through the dark. 20 minutes became 30. 30 became 40. Her breath came in white clouds and her throat screamed with every swallow and her eye throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The helping hand shelter appeared like a prayer answered. The small brick building on Northwest 7th was lit from within, warm light spilling through the windows. Cassandra pushed through the doors and found chaos waiting. The director, a woman named Margaret with gray hair and worried eyes, was on the phone. In the background, a child was crying, not the normal cry of exhaustion but something rawer, more desperate. Margaret saw Cassandra and her expression shifted from frustration to alarm. "Oh my God, what happened to your face?" Margaret stood and reached for Cassandra's arm, but Cassandra was already looking past her, toward the small room where the children slept. Oliver was sitting on a cot, his small body rigid with fever. The thermometer on the table beside him read 103.2 degrees. The boy was 6 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes that made him look ancient, and he was delirious, his small fists clenched, his lips moving in whispered prayers that no one could understand. His worn prayer card, so thin it was nearly transparent, was clutched in one hand. "He came in 2 weeks ago," Margaret explained, speaking fast. "No guardian, no paperwork. He won't tell us much except that his papa sent him away to be safe. His fever started this morning and it won't come down. I've called every hospital, but without insurance, without a legal guardian, they're talking about calling state services. They'll put him in the system, Cassandra, and he'll disappear into it, Anne." "No," Cassandra said. The word came out as a rasp. "No, that's not happening." She moved toward Oliver without thinking, without planning, running on pure instinct. The boy's eyes opened when she approached, and he looked at her with a fever-bright intensity that broke something inside her chest. "Mama." His voice was paper-thin. "Don't let them take me. Papa said to be brave, but I don't want to go. Please don't let them take me." Cassandra scooped him up. He weighed almost nothing, just a small body burning with heat, and she wrapped her coat around him and looked at Margaret. "I'm taking him to Miami Children's Hospital. Right now." "You can't just," Margaret started, but Cassandra was already moving toward the door. "Watch me," Cassandra said. The walk to Miami Children's Hospital took them through frozen streets, past closed shops and sleeping neighborhoods, through a darkness that felt absolute. Oliver clutched his prayer card and whispered about his papa, about how his papa had to send him away but told him to pray to St. Christopher and someday they would be together again. Cassandra did not understand the story he was telling, did not know what it meant or why a 6-year-old boy carried such weight in his voice. She only knew that with each step, the burning child in her arms became the only thing that mattered. The hospital doors slid open at 11:34 p.m. Inside, fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines breathing for people who could not breathe for themselves. A triage nurse looked at Oliver's fever, at Cassandra's destroyed face, and did not ask questions. She simply called for a doctor and waved them toward room 304, where tests would be run and fluids would be started and the machinery of modern medicine would spin into motion. By 11:52 p.m., Oliver was admitted. By midnight, a nurse appeared with a clipboard and an awkward smile. "We're going to need some information," she said. "Are you his mother?" Cassandra was not his mother. She was a stranger he had known for approximately 6 hours. But she said yes anyway, because the alternative was watching him disappear, and she could not watch that happen. At 1:15 a.m., the emergency room doors opened again, and 3 men in expensive black suits entered like a change in weather. The nurses straightened. People without conscious knowledge that they were doing it began moving out of the way. The man in the middle moved through the hospital with the certainty of someone accustomed to the world rearranging itself to accommodate his presence. Dominic Vitoli was 42, 6'3", with dark hair graying at the temples like silver threads being woven through silk. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, white and precise, a permanent reminder of a violence from 15 years ago. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Cassandra made in 3 months, and his watch was gold, and every movement he made was controlled, economical, the movements of a man who had never wasted energy on unnecessary gesture. Tony and Sal flanked him, younger men with the hard faces of people who had seen things they could not unsee. They moved with the coordination of men who had trained together, who had bled together, who understood violence in its various languages. Dominic was walking toward room 304, where his daughter Isabella lay in a hospital bed for the 6th month of fighting a rare blood disorder that the doctors said had no name, only possibilities and percentages and gradually declining odds. The nurse at the station stopped him with a hand that trembled slightly. "Mr. Vitoli, we found a donor. Your daughter is responding. The transfusion is beginning now, and the initial blood work suggests she's stabilizing." His expression did not change. But something in his chest shifted, a tectonic plate moving beneath the surface. "Who donated?" The nurse pointed across the waiting room, toward a woman wrapped in a donated blanket, her swollen eye catching the harsh fluorescent light, a child sleeping against her shoulder with a fever-flushed face and dark hair that matched, in every detail, the hair of a son Dominic had not seen in 3 years. For 2.4 seconds, Dominic Vitoli did not move. Then he walked toward her. People stepped aside without being asked. The waiting room air seemed to compress as he crossed it, his men following 1 step behind, and he stopped directly in front of Cassandra Pierce, who opened her eyes and saw danger incarnate looking at her with an intensity that made her throat close. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. Deep and solid like an oath. "That boy. Where did you find him?" Cassandra held Oliver closer, trying to protect him, trying to understand what was happening. "The shelter on Northwest 7th. I volunteer there. He came 2 weeks ago. No one came to claim him, he just..." "His name," Dominic said. "Oliver." The name hung in the air like a spell breaking. Oliver's eyes opened at the sound of his own name, and his fever-bright gaze found Dominic's face, and something shifted in the boy's expression from confusion to recognition to overwhelming certainty. "Papa." Dominic dropped to one knee. He reached out and pulled Oliver from Cassandra's arms, held his son against his body like he was made of glass, like he was the only real thing in a world of shadows. His hands were shaking. His breath caught somewhere in his chest and stayed there, trapped. Tony and Sal exchanged a look that neither had seen in 15 years of service, shock, genuine shock, at watching their boss cry. Oliver's worn prayer card fell to the floor. Dominic saw it and picked it up immediately, recognized it as the card he had pressed into his son's small hand 3 years ago, the card that said "Be brave and be safe and Papa will come for you." He turned to look at Cassandra with an expression that contained within it 15 years of rage and grief and loss, now collapsing into something softer. "You brought him here," Dominic said. "Not a question. A statement of fact. You gave blood for my daughter. You protected my son." Cassandra tried to stand and nearly fell. Her vision swam. Dominic caught her by the elbow, his grip gentle but unmovable, and guided her back to sit. His voice dropped even lower. "You are not going anywhere until you are strong enough to walk." He turned his head fractionally toward Tony. "Get Dr. Morrison. Get her food. Now." Tony moved like a man who had learned long ago not to question direct orders. Within 10 minutes, Dr. Morrison appeared, examined Cassandra's injuries with a clinical eye, documented the handprint bruises around her throat, the retinal bleeding behind her swollen eye, the split in her lip. He asked if she wanted to file a police report. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She had tried 5 times. Every time, nothing happened. Dominic listened to every word. Food appeared, real food, not the garbage can scraps she usually collected from the diner's trash bins. Pasta, still warm. Coffee with real cream. Cassandra's hand shook as she raised the fork to her lips. She could not remember the last time she ate a full meal without calculating its cost against rent she could not pay. Dominic sat across from her in the waiting room chairs, Oliver asleep against his shoulder, and he asked her questions in a voice gentler than seemed possible given the dangerousness of his face. "What is your name? Where do you work? Why were you at that shelter?" She answered carefully, leaving out the debts, the threats, trying to maintain some fragile dignity. But Dominic saw everything, the cheap waitress uniform, the worn shoes, the way she calculated before eating each bite like she was rationing. At 3:27 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Anthony Marchetti appeared on the screen. "I saw you go into the hospital. You better not be talking to cops. I'll be waiting when you come out." Her hand started shaking again. Dominic took her phone without asking, read the message, and his entire body went still in a way that was more dangerous than any explosion of anger could have been. "Who is this?" His voice was ice. She hesitated, and he simply repeated the question in the same tone. Finally she whispered, "My ex-boyfriend. He won't leave me alone. The police won't help because his cousin is a sergeant." Dominic handed the phone to Sal. "Find him." Sal nodded and disappeared into the night. "You can't," Cassandra said, panic rising. "He has connections. He'll make it worse." Dominic's eyes met hers and held them. "No one will ever touch you again." She stared at this dangerous man holding his son, not understanding why he would care. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "I am nobody." His answer came quietly, with an intensity that made her believe it. "You saved my daughter's life. You protected my son when the world abandoned him. That makes you everything." At 9:51 a.m., when Cassandra was finally allowed to leave, Dominic insisted Tony drive her in a black Mercedes that smelled like leather and money. She protested. He ignored her protests. As she was leaving, Dominic caught her hand. His grip was warm. His voice was steady. "You need anything, you call this number." He pressed a business card into her palm. Vitoli's, the upscale Italian restaurant on Brickell Avenue. The letters were embossed in gold. "I can't accept charity," she said. "It is not charity," he replied. "It is a debt. You gave blood for my daughter. I do not forget debts." She left confused, exhausted, terrified, carrying a business card that felt like it weighed more than paper should weigh. What changed everything happened at that same moment, across the city in an upscale office building in Coral Gables. Victoria Ashford sat behind a mahogany desk, reviewing her collections portfolio with the cold precision of a woman who had built her fortune buying desperate people's debts and crushing them without mercy. She was 45, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than Cassandra made annually, with eyes that had learned long ago how to see people as nothing but numbers on a spreadsheet. Her assistant placed a folder on her desk. The Pierce account. $150,000 outstanding. She's behind on payment. Medical expenses from 6 months ago. Victoria smiled. Medical bills meant leverage. Medical bills meant desperation. Medical bills meant a woman who would sign away anything to make the bleeding stop. "Seize everything," Victoria said. "File for wage garnishment. Make an example of her. And find out what hospital she was admitted to last night. If she's running up new bills, we need to know." The machinery was already in motion. And Cassandra had no idea that somewhere in the city, a woman was deciding her fate with the same casual cruelty that Anthony Marchetti used his fists. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The fluorescent lights of Rosario's diner hummed their tired song at 2:48 in the afternoon. Cassandra Pierce stood behind the counter in her faded uniform, a pale blue thing that had been washed so many times the fabric felt like paper against her skin. She was pouring coffee into a chipped mug when the woman walked in. Everything about her screamed money. Designer suit in charcoal gray, shoes that probably cost more than Cassandra's entire wardrobe, hair cut in that precise way that only wealthy women could afford. She slid into a booth in Cassandra's section without making eye contact. Victoria Ashford ordered black coffee and nothing else. Her voice was smooth, practiced, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Cassandra brought the cup and turned to leave, but something made her pause. The woman's eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that felt like being studied under glass. "You are Cassandra Pierce," Victoria said. Not a question. Cassandra's stomach tightened. "Yes?" "Your late husband, Marcus. $47,000 in outstanding medical debt, $103,000 in personal loans, plus $12,000 in credit card advances. Total outstanding liability, $150,000. Victoria lifted the coffee to her lips but did not drink. "I own all of it now. Every dollar. Every late fee. Every compounding interest charge." The diner tilted slightly. Cassandra gripped the edge of the booth. "I've been making payments. $17 a week, it's all I. $17 a week will take you 447 years to pay off the principal." Victoria set down the cup with deliberate care. "That assumes no new interest. In reality, you will die before the first loan is satisfied." A family in the next booth laughed over their sandwiches. The register chimed. The ceiling fan rotated. The world kept moving while Cassandra stood frozen. Victoria reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a folder. She laid it on the table with the care of someone placing evidence at a trial. "Wage garnishment has been filed. Your employer will be required to surrender 40% of your take-home pay directly to my company. Additionally, I have initiated bankruptcy proceedings on your behalf. Once finalized, your credit will be destroyed for the next decade. You will not qualify for housing, car loans, or any lines of credit. You will rent from landlords who prey on the desperate because you will have no other choice." Cassandra's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs. "There is, however, another path." Victoria opened the folder. Documents thick as a brick. Full payment of $150,000 within 5 days. After that timeline expires, I will seize every asset you possess. The 3 pieces of jewelry from your mother. Your car, assuming it is worth recovering. Your security deposit. Your dignity, in the form of a public filing that your neighbors and co-workers will see. I don't have it. I have $17. I've been trying to save, but the rent and the food and... Then you should have made better choices. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Her eyes were the color of ice. Your husband gambled away your future. You chose a man weak enough to destroy your life. Now you pay the price for those choices. That is justice. She placed a 50-cent tip on the table beside her untouched coffee and stood. Her heels clicked against the checkered floor like the second hand of a clock counting down. The bell above the door chimed when she left. Cassandra stood in the middle of the diner, holding a coffee pot, surrounded by the smell of grease and broken dreams. Her vision blurred. The customers kept eating. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. In a public place full of people, she had just watched her entire future be dismantled and no one had noticed. That night, the winter air turned brutal. Frost coated the streets of Miami like the world was dying. Cassandra walked without direction, following the glow of the city, her thin coat no defense against the wind that cut through the streets like a blade. The MacArthur Causeway stretched before her, connecting 2 parts of the city, separating the living from the water below. At midnight, she stood at the railing. The wind was loud here, carrying the smell of salt water and concrete and exhaust. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the cold metal. Stars overhead burned with indifferent light. Traffic moved behind her like white noise, like the sound of a world that would continue long after she stopped being part of it. The math never worked. $17 in her pocket against $150,000 owed. 8 months of drowning, every effort to save herself pulling her deeper. Marcus's debts wrapped around her neck like an anchor. Anthony's fists, his voice, his hands. Victoria's cruelty delivered in designer shoes and practiced voice. The pressure built and built and built until there was no room left inside her chest for anything except the weight. The water looked quiet. Still. Final. She pulled out her phone. Probably another creditor, another threat, another voice telling her she had failed. But the text was from a number she did not recognize. The words came through in simple sentences. Oliver asks about you every day. He drew you a picture. Come to dinner at Vitoli's tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Dominic. Below was an image. A crayon drawing, rendered in the clumsy, perfect way of a 6-year-old's hands. A woman holding a child. Both of them smiling. A sun in the corner with too many rays. Oliver's careful signature at the bottom. Cassandra looked at the water. Then at the phone. At the water. At the drawing. She stepped back from the railing. Not because hope had arrived. Not because the numbers suddenly worked or Victoria had changed her mind or Anthony had disappeared. She stepped back because a child remembered her. Because somewhere in this city, a boy had thought of her enough to press crayon to paper and ask his father if she might come to dinner. It was not enough reason to live, but it was a reason not to die tonight. The next evening, she walked into Vitoli's for the first time. The restaurant was upscale in the way that only serious money could create. Candlelight reflected off dark wood and white linens. The smell of fresh bread and simmering tomato sauce and red wine hung in the air like a promise of comfort. Soft Italian music drifted through speakers hidden in the walls. Couples in expensive clothes sat at tables, eating food that cost more than her weekly groceries. Dominic met her at the door himself. He was dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, his silver cufflinks catching the light. His scarred face showed no reaction to her cheap black dress, her worn shoes, the way she was shaking slightly as she clutched her purse. "Cassandra," he said, and the way he spoke her name made it sound like something precious. "Come." He guided her past the main dining room, past curious eyes, to a private booth in the back separated by a velvet curtain. His booth. The table was already set. Oliver sat there, grinning so wide his whole face seemed to glow. He was healthy now, properly fed, wearing clothes that fit. Isabella sat beside him, a tiny 7-year-old with dark curls and her father's serious eyes, watching Cassandra with careful curiosity. "Vivi!" Oliver launched himself at her legs and hugged with the force of someone who had been waiting for this moment for days. Dominic served them himself. Pasta carbonara, fresh bread still warm from the kitchen, Italian wine for the adults, sparkling grape juice for the children. Oliver chatted constantly about his new room in his papa's house, the big yard, the dog named Bruno. Isabella asked quiet questions about the shelter, about the other children, about what it felt like to help people who had nothing. Cassandra answered in a daze. She had walked into someone else's life by mistake. This could not be real. The food tasted like forgiveness. Halfway through the meal, Dominic stood. "Tony will show you both to the kitchen. There is fresh gelato. Choose whatever flavors you want." He kissed the top of each child's head and watched them go, his Lieutenant Tony leading them gently away. Alone with Cassandra, the energy shifted. Dominic slid an envelope across the table. It was cream-colored, expensive stock. His initials embossed in gold. "Open it," he said. She did. Her hand shook as she pulled out 2 checks. The first was made out to Victoria Ashford's company. $150,000. The second was made out to Cassandra Pierce. $25,000. Below them was a handwritten note in careful script, "Your debt is paid. The second amount is for starting over. No strings. No obligations. You saved my children. I do not forget." "I can't," she whispered. The number swam in her vision. "This is too much. I'll never be able to pay you back. I can't accept." "You already paid me back," Dominic said, his voice absolute and quiet. "With your blood. With your kindness to a child who had nothing. The debt is mine, not yours. This is settled." She started crying. 8 months of drowning, 8 months of pressure, 8 months of believing she was invisible and worthless, all of it broke open at once. Tears poured down her face and she could not stop them. She did not see the way Dominic's expression softened, did not see him reach across the table and take her shaking hand, did not see the scar on his face seem to fade in the candlelight. But what neither of them knew was that 3 blocks away, in a narrow Wynwood apartment, Anthony Marchetti was about to understand that some debts cannot be negotiated. The door to his apartment exploded inward at 10:31 p.m. 12 men in black moved through the darkness like ghosts, professional and silent. Anthony barely had time to stand before Sal had him face down on the tile floor, zip ties cutting into his wrists, blood dripping from a split lip. "You can't do this, my cousin's connected, he's..." Sal did not speak. He dragged Anthony off the floor by his arm and toward the black van waiting outside. Anthony screamed threats about lawsuits, about his connections, about revenge. But Sal did not listen. They drove him 3 hours south to the Everglades where representatives of the Castellano family waited in the darkness. Dominic had made one call, offered them Anthony as a gift, explained his crimes against women. The Castellanos did not forget violence against the helpless. Anthony was dragged away screaming into the swamp darkness. He was never seen again. No body, no arrest, no trial. Just gone, like a stain being wiped away. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford arrived at her Coral Gables office at 8:16 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. FBI agents stood in the lobby, federal warrants in their hands. "Victoria Ashford," the lead agent said. "You're under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, and extortion." Her hands were cuffed in front of her employees. Cameras from local news caught her face bright red with shock and rage. She was loaded into a federal vehicle, screaming about her lawyers and her rights as they drove her away. The charges were overwhelming. 40 years minimum. Every asset seized. Every dollar frozen. The empire she had built crushing desperate people came down in a single morning. Her final image in the public eye would be a handcuffed woman in a wrinkled designer suit, makeup smeared. The magnificent life she had constructed turned to ash in a single morning. 9 months later. The frost crept across the Miami night like a whisper, coating windshields and bare branches with a thin crust of ice. Cassandra Pierce stood in her new apartment in Wynwood, a modest 2-bedroom with windows that actually closed properly, with locks that held, with a landlord who did not come to collect payment with his fists. She had paid off the $150,000 debt in 8 months. The remaining money had been carefully, deliberately spent on exactly 3 things: a deposit for this place, 3 semesters of business courses at Miami-Dade Community College, and a second-hand laptop that did not freeze every time she opened it. She was nobody's shadow now. That was what surprised her most. The business course textbook sat stacked on the kitchen counter. Introduction to Accounting. Restaurant Management. Marketing for Small Enterprises. She had read them cover to cover, underlining passages, writing notes in margins. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she sat in a classroom with 22 other people who wanted to build something, not survive something. Her professor, a woman named Dr. Chen with silver streaking her black hair, had pulled her aside after the final exam. "Your analysis of cash flow management is exceptional," Dr. Chen had said. "Have you thought about management positions? You have the mind for it." No one had ever suggested Cassandra had a mind for anything. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dominic, sent at 7:43 p.m. "How are you settling in? Need anything?" She read it 3 times. This was how he communicated now. Brief. Respectful. Never demanding. Never showing up unannounced with flowers or declarations. Every gesture came with space attached to it, room for her to breathe. She typed back, "I am fine. The courses are harder than I expected, but I like that." He responded immediately, "You are going to excel. You always do." She set the phone down. This dance they were doing, this careful distance, felt like standing on the edge of something without being pushed. She wanted to ask him why he bothered texting at all, but she already knew. The same reason he had protected her through the Anthony nightmare. The same reason he waited. 3 weeks into her volunteer work at Oliver's elementary school, Cassandra realized something had shifted. She was setting up the book fair donation table in the library, arranging colorful picture books in neat stacks, when the fluorescent lights flickered and the air changed the way it always did when Dominic Vitoli entered a room. Parents who had been chatting stopped mid-sentence. Teachers straightened papers on desks. But Dominic ignored all of it. He walked directly to Cassandra. He was dressed simply. Black jeans, a charcoal sweater, a wool coat that probably cost more than she made in 2 months. His dark eyes carried that careful patience he had learned somehow, somewhere, to show her. "Oliver said you would be here," he said. The book fair was his idea. He wanted to build the biggest reading section of any school in Miami. She smiled. I believe those were his exact words. Dominic smiled back. It transformed his face completely. "That sounds like my son." They worked side by side for 3 hours. Dominic sorted donations while Cassandra organized them by reading level. They discussed which books made children cry, which made them laugh. Dominic confessed that he read to Oliver every night, that Isabella preferred stories about women who saved kingdoms. Cassandra told him about a girl named Sophia who had checked out 8 books and was reading at a 3rd grade level in 2nd grade. "How do you remember all of this?" Dominic asked. "Because nobody remembered anything about me when I was that age," Cassandra said. "No one noticed when I was hungry. No one asked what I was reading." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of something decided. "I notice now." Walking to their cars afterward, frost crackling under their shoes, the school parking lot empty except for the 2 of them and the darkness pressing in from all sides, Dominic stopped near her Honda Civic. His breath was visible in the cold air. His scar caught the light from the parking lot lamps, the thin white line running from his eye to his cheekbone, a geography of violence she had stopped being afraid of. "You have rebuilt your life," he said. You stand as an equal now. Not someone who needs saving. Cassandra turned to face him. The frost on the windshield behind him glittered like diamonds. Is that what you were waiting for? I will not take advantage of someone drowning, Dominic said. I needed you to find solid ground first. The air between them contracted. The space that had been so carefully maintained suddenly felt unbearable. From the moment I saw you in that hospital waiting room, Dominic continued, beaten but protecting my daughter, something frozen inside me cracked. I have spent 9 months keeping my distance because you deserved the chance to choose freely. Without desperation. Without obligation. Without owing me anything. Cassandra's hand moved without asking permission. Her fingers touched the scar across his eyebrow. His skin was warm despite the cold. I thought you were just being kind because I helped your children. I am not a good man, Cassandra. His voice dropped, became something careful and true. I have done things that would horrify you. I have ordered men killed for smaller offenses than what was done to you. I have built an empire on the suffering of people who could not defend themselves. But you make me want to be better. You do not have to feel the same. I just needed you to know. She looked at this man standing in the frost, this dangerous man with a scar and a code and a capacity for tenderness that nobody expected from someone like him. She thought about the night he had broken into a hospital. The blood on his hands. The absolute fury in his eyes when he learned what Anthony had done. She thought about the month since. The distance he had maintained. The way he had let her build something on her own terms. I know exactly what you are, Dominic, she said. And I am choosing you anyway. Their first kiss happened in the freezing parking lot, under a sky full of stars so sharp they looked like they could cut. It was slow and careful and terrified and certain all at once. When they pulled apart, frost was forming on the car windows around them, and Cassandra was crying without knowing when she had started. Do not cry, Dominic whispered. His thumb brushed her cheek. No more crying. These are different tears, she said. These are the kind that mean I am alive. Christmas Eve arrived clear and cold. The private booth at Vitoli's restaurant was set for 4, candlelight flickering against white tablecloths, wine glasses catching the warmth from the candles. Dominic's homemade pasta sauce simmered on the table, the smell of garlic and tomato and basil filling the small space. Italian Christmas music played softly through hidden speakers. Cassandra wore a simple blue dress, the same color as the water in the Keys where she had once stood contemplating the edge of everything. Around her neck, a small diamond necklace, understated, not bought but earned through months of waiting and choosing. Oliver and Isabella decorated cookies at the table, sugar dusting their fingers, the children completely unconcerned with the danger that had once hunted their family. Isabella leaned against Cassandra's shoulder without asking permission, the way children do when they understand that touch is welcome, that they are safe. Oliver pushed a drawing across the table. His artwork had improved dramatically over the past year. This picture showed 4 figures holding hands, drawn in careful pencil with colored markers filling in the details. The figures were labeled, Papa, Cassandra, Ollie, and Bella. Across the top, in Oliver's careful printing, familiar. That is us, Oliver said. That is our family. Cassandra looked at the drawing, at the child who had carried a worn prayer card and believed in saints, at the girl leaning against her shoulder, at the man across the table watching his children with eyes that had been cold for so long they had forgotten how to hold warmth. She thought about that night on the causeway, counting $17, believing that nothing remained worth living for. She thought about the blood donation, the moment of choice, the willingness to help a stranger's child. She thought about how sometimes the smallest decision echoes through everything that comes after it. That one moment of yes. That one hand reached out at exactly the right time. That one moment of choosing to bleed for someone else's child. It had changed everything. Dominic raised his wine glass. His men were not here. His empire did not exist in this moment. He was simply a father, a man, a person who had learned that mercy and survival were not always opposites. To family, he said. However we find it. They raised their glasses. The candlelight caught the edges of the wine, turning it ruby red. Outside the restaurant windows, the Miami night glittered with frost and stars, cold and beautiful and full of the kind of darkness that only exists so light can matter. Cassandra had never planned to save a mafia boss's family. She had never imagined that donating blood would lead to safety, to education, to standing as an equal beside a man who had learned her value before she knew it herself. But sometimes life does not follow the plans we make. Sometimes it follows the choices we make in moments of absolute desperation, when we have nothing left to lose and everything to give. She learned that the most dangerous men can love the most fiercely, that standing as an equal is the only foundation worth building on, that sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life completely. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to remember that second chances are real. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will remind you exactly why kindness is never wasted. Drop a comment telling us, what would you have done in Cassandra's position? We read every single one. No matter how hard life gets, remember that your worst moment might be the doorway to your best life. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. We wish you all good health, joyful lives, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.